Welcome to Break It Down, a discussion about barriers to prosperity in the state of Alabama, hosted by Alabama Possible. In this webinar, we will discuss the barriers to prosperity and how we can use the barrier to prosperity data sheet to make decisions. We have asked our board members to share about the data sheet and the experience with it. Before I welcome our panelists, I would like to let you know that this webinar is recorded and will be posted on Alabama's Possible YouTube channel. Now, I would like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Kristina Scott.
Hi, I'm Kristina Scott, and I'm the Executive Director of Alabama Possible. Archie?
Hello, I'm Archie Tucker. I am a board member with Alabama Possible, but I also serve as Vice President for Marketing, Communication, and Advancement at Alabama A&M University, located in Huntsville.
Hi, I'm Laurel Hitchcock. I'm an Associate Professor of Social Work at the University of Alabama at Birmingham and a longtime board member. Natalie?
Good morning, I'm Natalie Bolling. I serve on the Governance Committee of Alabama Possible, and I'm also Senior Employment Attorney with Vulcan Materials Company.
And I'm Ralph Foster. I'm a longtime board member, former board chair of Alabama Possible. I'm Assistant Vice President for University Outreach and Public Service at Auburn University.
Thank you, everyone. Now we will move, we will have Kristina give an overview of the agenda, and she will give us also an overview of the data sheet.
Thanks so much, Manisha, and thank you to everyone for watching this video. We are going to review the Barriers to Prosperity data sheet, and then our board members who are also educators, attorneys for large Alabama businesses, folks who are engaged in their communities. We're going to ask them to share their thoughts about the data sheet, and for us all to think about how we can use the data sheet and use data to break down barriers to prosperity in Alabama. This is the 10th year that we have produced a data sheet. And one of the things that's new this year is that we changed the name. And so historically, it has been called the Poverty Data Sheet. And that's really based in Alabama Possible's history as an organization and our desire to educate Alabamians about the poverty that lives in our communities, and to think about how we can all use our philanthropy, our volunteerism, and our advocacy voices to break down barriers to prosperity and to think about how we can reduce and one day end poverty. And so as I was thinking about putting together this year's data sheet, Alabama's economy in January, when we started this, was at historic highs. However, we still have so many of our neighbors that are living below the poverty line and don't know what prosperity looks like. And so I thought it was really important that we shift the conversation not to what we're trying to end, but where are we trying to go as a state, where every single Alabamian has economic security and can weather the storm when things like COVID hit their communities. And so the news of the past few months have shown us that reducing poverty is not the same thing as producing prosperity. So some of the highlights from the data, and we put together this data sheet every year. It includes data from all 67 Alabama counties. And we take data from the Census Bureau, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Commission on Higher Education, the State Department of Education, the Department of Human Resources, and other federal and state sources. So we compile this each year based on data that you, our supporters and audience, have told us is important to you. This year's findings show that more than 800,000 Alabamians live below the federal poverty line. That's only $25,701 for a family of 4, and that is far less than what it actually takes to support a family. The federal poverty line is based on data from the early 1960s and has only been adjusted for inflation since that time. So it's been consistent for us over the years, but doesn't really reflect what it takes to support a family. Poverty has decreased by 2.4%. It hit a high of 19.2% in 2014. Now, today, it sits at 16.8%, or at least it sat there with our latest data release in 2018. We know that many more families have fallen below the poverty line since we've had the COVID come to Alabama, and so many of our neighbors have lost their jobs. Alabama has a consistently high poverty rate. This year, we're the 5th poorest state in the country, and the national poverty rate, the national average, is only 13.1%. Another way to look at the economic security of our communities is to look at median household income. And median household income is the number that's in the middle when you put everyone's income along a line. It is not the average. So our median household income is $49,881. That is a peak since we've been doing this work, and that is amazing. However, the gap between Alabama's median household income and the nation's median household income is at $12,056. And that really shows you that even though Alabama has hit a peak in household income, we really are not keeping up with our other 49 states. Some of the other findings are that 10 of our 67 counties have a poverty rate higher than 25%. So if you have a data sheet, if you got it in the mail, or if you downloaded it from our website at alabamapossible.org/data sheet, you'll see these dark counties have poverty rates that are higher than 25%. 8 counties have poverty rates that are higher than 30%. And only Shelby and Baldwin counties have poverty rates that are less than 10%. So poverty really touches every single corner of our state, and it impacts our ability to have a prosperous community. It impacts employers' ability to hire workers. It impacts families' abilities to buy groceries and put a roof over their head. And it impacts how we can recruit new businesses into the state of Alabama. African American and Latino families experience significantly higher rates of poverty than white families do. And so that's on the data sheet. If you look at these bars that are on the right-hand side of the data sheet, you can see by race or ethnicity, and it's important to take a look at how poverty and a lower household income impacts people based on their race. And so you can see on here that white Alabamians experience poverty at 12.2%, while African Americans experience it at 28.4%, and Latino Alabamians experience it at 32.2%. So while only 12.2% of white individuals live below the federal poverty line, 28.4% of African Americans and 32.2% of Latino individuals live below the poverty line. And households are also impacted, and you see disparate outcomes in income. So whereas white Alabamians have a median household income of $55,690, that's close to the national median household income, African American households have a median household income of $32,188, and Hispanic or Latino households have a median household income of $38,314. So these are wide gaps that we see based on the color of our neighbor's skin. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is the opportunity for us to have a discussion about our state's difficult racial history and how that results in these inequities in today's world. And so I think it also makes it difficult for some families to really wrap their head around the size of the challenges we have in Alabama. When you look at white families' median household income and how it compares to our neighbors, we may be doing okay, and it's hard to really put ourselves in the shoes and experience what our neighbors of color are experiencing, and to think about what their lives and worlds look like and what opportunities they have or don't have, again, based on the color of their skin and our state's very difficult racial history. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing about how the other panelists have interpreted the data. What does it mean to them, and how do they see that we can use this for policymaking and decision making?
Thank you, Kristina, for the overview. So with this as the backdrop, now we'll move on to discussing with our board members how they feel about the data sheet and how they can use the data sheet and what their experience has been. We will start with Archie Tucker. Archie, you're one of our newest board members, so welcome to the board.
Thank you.
Tell us where you live and what you learned about your community through this data sheet.
Yeah, so I live in Huntsville, Alabama. Been here within the state of Alabama for 9 years now, originally from Mississippi. And when I received the data sheet, I can say for the most part was not surprised. Some of our southern states, Alabama, Mississippi, and others tend to lag behind as it relates to the things that, or we tend to top the list of some of those negative things that we would rather be on the bottom of the list for. And so poverty is one. And so what I first saw is that we are 5th among the nation in poverty rate. And so that was, I can't say it was a shock, but to see the numbers and to see that we have more than 800,000 of our brothers and sisters here in Alabama in poverty, there's a lot of work to be done, And so I'm thankful for organizations such as Alabama Possible that are tackling this issue head on, seeking to create policy, work with legislators to create policy to move this state forward and put us in a better light as it relates to poverty.
So how do you think you'll use this data sheet with others to talk about poverty?
So I'll start at my university. So as I stated earlier, I'm one of the vice presidents for marketing at Alabama A&M University. And so I'll start with my circle of influence there. I think as a HBCU, we're familiar with this because a number of our students come from a number of the areas that are more greatly impacted. And so we understand their challenges, but it gives us insight on a macro level, looking at this data sheet and looking at the communities in which our students come from. So I'll definitely start at the university, and I think it's worth a broader conversation at the city and the county level as well, as we talk through this and determine what can be done to address some of these issues.
So, and how do you think others can use the data sheet to inform how they are fighting poverty in their communities?
Well, I think it's bringing the total community together from your educational leaders, starting right there in your county. Educational leaders, politicians, the faith community, the business community. I think it's a collaborative approach. It's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all situation within each county, but I think you certainly have to look at it from a collaborative standpoint, bring all entities of the community, as well as those that are in these situations, those that are below the poverty line. You have to hear from those individuals to understand what their circumstances are, what their challenges are, and what we can do as a collaborative community to address those. So the first thing is just bringing those groups together and then having the discussions and being honest with ourselves and hearing from those that are more greatly impacted.
Thank you. Thank you, Archie, and welcome again to Alabama Possible's board. And now we will move on to Laurel Hitchcock. So Laurel, you have been on the board of Alabama Possible for many years, as you had mentioned in your introduction. How have you used this data sheet over the years to talk about poverty in Alabama?
Yeah, thanks, Manisha, and I appreciate being here today. One of my favorite ways to use the data sheet is to use it with my friends and family. When I do fundraising, I like to use the data sheet in order to talk with folks about it. And so it's a nice visual. So I'm going to hold it up here. I know Kristina did a great job holding it up. But it's a great visual to share with people. Yay, way to go, Archie. Yeah. And so each year for my birthday, I like to do fundraising. I like to be able to give rather than to receive. And so I ask people to make donations on my behalf to Alabama Possible. And when I talk about the agency and I talk about the organization and they give a donation, I give them a data sheet and I pull it out and we talk about it. And people are always surprised when you look at it. And I know it's hard to see right here, but you can look at, I live here in Jefferson County, and I have friends who live in Shelby County, right down to the south. And they're always shocked because Shelby County consistently has the lowest rates of poverty in Alabama. And so it always spurs conversations. I carry these in my car. When I have enough of them, they fit in my briefcase and I hand them out as much as I can to people because a visual is a great way to graphically show. Again, if you look at these bar graphs, I know you can't really see them, but it's just striking the difference in poverty rates with people of different races in our state. And when you look at that, it's much more difficult to ignore. It's easy to rattle off numbers, but when you see it visually, it's so much easier to pay attention to it. So that's really how I use the data sheet on an everyday basis.
Okay, so as a professor at UAB, how do you use this data sheet with your students?
Yeah, so I'm a licensed social worker in the state of Alabama, and I teach social workers. And part of the work that we do is we go out and we work with vulnerable populations, and we work to try to increase making sure people's basic needs are getting met. And so I use the data poverty sheet in the classroom with my students when we look at community assessment. It's really important to understand the individual, but it doesn't matter if they're in a community that's challenged. And if you don't have jobs in your community as much as you want to work, it's really difficult, right? And so I use this data sheet with my students, and I give them one, and we talk about how you might assess a community. And I ask them to look at the data sheet and identify where they're from in Alabama. And then we go through the data on the back. And I don't know if Kristina showed you the back of the data sheet. It's not as visually pleasing, right? It's got a lot of numbers, a lot of data. But one of the things I do with the students is I say, okay, let's talk about the population as a whole. And then I like to focus on children, because in Alabama, one of the challenges is typically across the board, 1 out of every 4 children in Alabama lives in poverty. And most of my students want to work with children. They go into the child welfare system or the juvenile justice system. And understanding that 1 out of 4 children in Alabama come from poverty is really important when you're going to work with students, or work with clients and communities. And so understanding this, understanding the communities where the people that we work with come from is really important for my students.
Okay. So tell us how other helping professionals in Alabama are using or can use this data sheet.
Mm-hmm. So there are just a variety of ways. I mean, I said I carry it in my briefcase. People can leave it on their desk. They can put it up in their office. I have a colleague in my department who every year she asks me for the latest copy, And if it comes a little late, she gets, you know, she's demanding and she asks for it because she posts it on the door of her office. And she posts one on the front of the door and one on the back of the door. And so it creates a conversation when anybody walks in her office. So that's one way that she uses it. I've been out visiting. I go out and talk with other helping professionals out in the community. I'll visit them in their offices. I particularly do a lot of conversations with folks in child welfare. And it is not uncommon for a county director or some other individual to sit down and talk with me, and we're talking about poverty rates, and they might pull out the Alabama poverty data sheet from their desk and point out, hey, remember this or see this community? And they use it a lot with other helping professionals. So to educate, to inform about policy and things like that. This is why it's important that we're doing the work that we're doing. And so those are ways I've seen other helping professionals use this data sheet. So I encourage everybody to get a copy of it and maybe get a couple copies of it and share it and pass it out with everybody to have those conversations.
Thank you, Laurel. Thank you. And thank you for your support of Alabama Possible.
Absolutely.
So now we will move on to Natalie Bolling. Natalie, you have been on the board of Alabama Possible for a few years too. How have you used this data sheet over the years to talk about poverty in Alabama?
Good morning, Manisha, and thank you. So this is my second year serving on the board of Alabama Possible. And for me, the data sheet initially informed my decision to join the board, and it supports my passion in talking with existing and potential donors about breaking down barriers to prosperity. You know, this is not some abstract idea that Alabama has a significant amount of poverty. Rather, the data sheet confirms that the mission of Alabama Possible is supported by concrete facts. And you know, for me, concrete facts is not really hard to talk to others about. I am from and grew up in Bibb County, Alabama, a county that has people living in poverty at 28.1%. I now live in Shelby County, Alabama, a county with the lowest levels of poverty in Alabama. For me, I personally feel like I have, you know, broken a barrier, but again, I'm just one person. So the data sheet continues to inform us that there is an incredible amount of work to do, and breaking down the barriers to prosperity is key in doing this.
Thank you. So as a lawyer for Vulcan Materials, one of the largest, state's largest businesses, how does the data sheet inform your work?
Vulcan Materials Company is the nation's foremost producer of construction aggregates. We have operations across the country and beyond. For purposes of this conversation, we're headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama, with operations across the state, including some of the counties with pretty high levels of poverty. As an employment lawyer for Vulcan, I have the great opportunity to work with various employees across the state. And realizing that employees have different needs, different circumstances, different levels of support they need based on those circumstances, helps to keep the human factor for me in making decisions. Inclusion and respect for differences is tantamount to me and to Vulcan. And making sure that you understand those differences and where people are from and the background they grew up in, you know, helps us to keep that to the forefront.
So tell us how you think the business community in Alabama can use the data sheet to break down barriers to prosperity.
I think the data sheet helps the business community realize that diversity is not just about race and gender, right? It's about all of those other aspects of differences from one person to the next. Studying the data sheet can inform businesses and employers in looking at their own workforce. Certainly, I think the poverty sheet can help the business community ensure that they are really engaging in the communities they operate in and serve. And this involves being intentional about creating jobs, ensuring retention for employees. The business community should keep in mind in reviewing this data sheet that they have a really strong and influential voice over people who make policy decisions relating to employability, whether it be public health care, infrastructure, education, public services. They have this strong voice, and I encourage the business community to use it.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalie, for answering these questions. And thank you for bringing your passion into your role as a board member of Alabama Possible. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So now we'll move on to Ralph Foster. So Ralph, you were the past president of Alabama Possible Board. You have seen many editions of the sheet, data sheet too. How have you used data sheet over the years?
Well, in my role at the university, I've had to do this type of research myself for various community engagement reports, economic impact statements, and I can tell you it's time consuming. It's a lot of detail, a lot of sources that you have to sift through to pull together this wealth of information, but also to present it in a way that's meaningful to the particular point that you're trying to make, or to the particular audience that you're trying to inform. And so the poverty data sheet is really quite an amazing accomplishment for an organization to do it on a regular level and to put it together in such a concise and pleasant way to read. I mean, it's well produced. It brings together very key information about poverty and its related impacts on how we live. Food security, our educational attainment, our employment attainment. And so it brings these together and tells the story in a way that's meaningful to not only me as an educator, but also to other groups. In our role in university outreach at Auburn, we're constantly working with different civic leaders, concerned citizens, nonprofit organizations, governmental groups, and each of those are focused on various aspects of poverty and how they either want to approach it, to shape their mission, to shape their responses. And so I use the poverty data sheet as a way to say, the research is there, the information is there. Here's how you can look at it, use it to inform your particular activities. And I found that the accompanying discussion guide, which is sent to educators in schools and is available to other groups as well, helps organizations and individuals go through these various aspects of the conditions of poverty, where it occurs, and how it impacts our fellow citizens across the state. And thus it can help them think in a more meaningful and purposeful way what they can and should be doing as individuals and organizations.
So tell us about how the faith community in Alabama can use the data sheet to break down the barriers to prosperity.
Well, as I said, the poverty data sheet is, or the new barriers to prosperity data sheet, as we have rebranded it this year, it's meaningful to a variety of groups, whether it's university individuals, whether it's civic leadership, or nonprofit groups, and certainly to the faith-based community, because increasingly over the years, and particularly in Alabama, the faith-based community has been the boots on the ground on addressing different aspects of poverty, either from a relief point of view, and you see that particularly in food security, but also from the standpoint of providing educational resources, job training, positioning. So faith-based groups have really become at the front and center of our response to promoting prosperity. At Auburn, food security in particular is one of our major projects that we have in our office. And food security is addressed, in the data sheet, among the elements on the back that give you some striking elements about hunger and access to good, nutritious food. The concepts of the food desert, where people may be surrounded by plenty of gas stations where they can buy Twinkies, but do they really have access to good, nutritious food that will help them from a health point of view, will help them be able to lead better lives nutritionally? And faith-based groups, many of them have food pantries. So there's a direct correlation right there to a particular ministry. But where I found it most important is in provoking thought and dialogue with groups. And again, particularly ministries, churches, it's a very community thing. Churches are across our state, across our communities, and they serve, in many cases, very small groups of people in concise areas, and they're very familiar with their circumstances in those particular areas, but they may not have a larger view of the broader community or the broader metropolitan area or a broader rural area around them that they might intend that they wish to serve. And as an example, I attended a meeting, church was giving a presentation about Alabama Possible and used the data sheet, in particular was using the map, as Laurel was saying, showing how there's some counties that have very deep rates of ingrained poverty and other areas that have less. And afterwards, several individuals came up and said, we're looking at this and we never realized that our county had such a high level of poverty. And they said, we don't see it. We consider our area and our neighborhoods, middle income. And I said, yes, that's the thing about it, is that you can be in your own area and you can be used to your own circumstances and still be very well-meaning and be very sensitive that, yes, in Alabama, there's a high degree of poverty, but it's around us. And it's around us in areas that if we just reach out a bit, we'll see that even an affluent county or a county that has a lower level of poverty percentage still will have significant areas, significant neighborhoods that are isolated from the availability of food security, educational resources, employment options. And so reframing this as a barrier to prosperity is a good way to have that thought-provoking discussion that poverty is not just something that's over there, it's with us. And it's with our friends and neighbors. It's as close to us as that fourth or fifth person in line, at the store. And so that's how I have seen it be extremely useful in informing people, but also making them think about how poverty exists in our state and what can we do to help remove some of these barriers to prosperity.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you for your support over the years for Alabama Possible and sharing today. So thank you to all the board members for sharing your experience with the data sheet and giving us a guide on how others could also use it in their areas of work. Now I would like to invite Kristina to give the closeout for the meeting.
Thanks so much to everyone for sharing your perspectives. And I think one of the interesting things about the data sheet is that each person can bring the topics that they're interested in and find out more information about their community or that particular topic. Barriers to prosperity sit at the intersection of poverty, income, education, and employment. And each one of us can play a role in breaking down those barriers to prosperity. We can't afford as a state to wait for some other people or some other time to move our state forward. And that has become so abundantly clear as we see the pictures and hear about the lines at food pantries and the now nearly 500,000 Alabamians who have lost their jobs due to COVID and its impact on our economy. And so I hope that each one of you will take the data sheet. Again, you can download it at alabamapossible.org/datasheet or send us an email at info@alabamapossible if you need to get a copy. Take the discussion guide that is also available at alabamapossible.org/datasheet and have a conversation with your friends and family. We're all spending so much time at home. Now is the perfect time to have that conversation. And I hope that you will join the online conversation on social media. We have a discussion going on our Facebook page at Alabama Possible. We're also on Twitter and Instagram. And so have the conversation in your household and then engage with others around you as we think about how we can break down barriers to prosperity. We have to do something to keep our state moving forward, and there is no more important time than now. And I want to thank again each one of our board members and supporters for bringing their individual perspective to this. And I invite everyone else to join the conversation. Thank you and have a great day.